Hi, my name is Francis Sue. I am a professor of mathematics at Harvey College, which is a small science and engineering school in Southern California in the United States. And I'm really pleased to be here with you at this Vision Conference. And I look forward to us getting a chance to chat a little bit later on in the Q&A. What I'd like to do today is talk a bit about what does it mean to be both a scientist and a Christian? How is it possible that I could be both? But first, maybe I'll start off with a little bit about my own journey to faith and how it is that I am now a follower of Jesus. I grew up in a small town in South Texas. My parents were Chinese immigrants and they had immigrated to the US. My dad was a college professor of political science. And so I grew up in this small town in Texas, basically getting used to the academic lifestyle. At an early age, I was interested in doing math and science. And so I just thought, oh, okay, someday I'd like to be a professor as well, but of mathematics. I basically had the childhood where um, I was fascinated by science. I read lots of books about mathematics, and I didn't really begin to ask questions, spiritual questions, um, until right before I went off to college. And that came about because both my parents had become very ill. My mother had Lou Gehrig's disease, developed Lou Gehrig's disease, which is basically a motor neuron disease that causes the body to just slowly become paralyzed. Your mind is clear, but your body basically just stops working. It's a terrible disease, uh, and um, and our family faced that, but also the prospect of my dad having a difficult bout with cancer. And so, right before I went off to college, I had this crisis because suddenly both my parents were had life-threatening illnesses, and I had never really wrestled with the deep question of like why am I doing what I'm doing? Right? Why am I studying so hard to do mathematics? And if all that happens is that we live and die and that's it. So I had this crisis when I went off to college. I began to ask some deep questions. I didn't really feel like other people were going through any of the difficult things that I was going through. Uh, and one of the things that happened my first year in college is that I met Christians who were also thinking believers. It was the first time maybe that I had met people who not only had a deep religious commitment, but also seemed to be smart, seemed to be thoughtful. And that intrigued me. And so we became friends over the course of the year, but it really wasn't until the end of my first year in college, in a chance encounter with some strangers on an elevator, where they challenged me to think um, uh, about what I was doing here and what they challenged me to. They explained who Jesus was to me, and they challenged me to think um, about things that I'd never thought about. And so we met over lunch a couple of days later, and they explained the Christian gospel to me, which is the good news, and that's what the word gospel means, is good news. And the good news that, as I began to understand at that time, was I always had this picture of religion as just being something that you do to become a moral person, and they really surprised me by explaining that, in fact, following the Christian uh, religion is not actually about becoming moral. It's actually about following a person, and that person is Jesus Christ. And because Jesus loved us first, we respond to Him with a desire to please Him by becoming moral. But it's not something that we do in order to earn His favor. So this is the Christian idea of grace, that we don't do anything to earn God's favor. He just freely gives that to us or bestows that upon us. And we respond out of love. And And so this was totally turning what I thought of religion upside down, right? It somehow made sense to me as it was explained to me, and it actually offered me a certain kind of hope that, in my despair about the state of my parents' health, in my despair over what seemed to be the meaninglessness of the world, that in fact there was meaning, and there was an understanding that I could have that sort of transcends what seemed to be just material hopelessness. And so that's basically, it certainly started me on a journey of following Jesus, and of course over time that has changed a lot. We can talk more about that in the Q&A if you like. But what I want to focus on now is just to describe a little bit about my own thinking as I understand it now of the relationship between science and faith, and how it is that I can be both a scientist and a Christian. And so one of the ways that I like to think about science is that it offers an explanation for material processes, physical processes. It answers a question how things work, right? Like if I want to understand how it is that the sun is shining, I might be able to explain that through physical processes, right? Or if I want to understand how it is that I'm able to speak to you over, Zoom technology, then that's another question that science can answer. But what my faith offers is answers to different kinds of questions. The questions that get at the meaning and the purpose of things, right? Like if I want to understand why is it that I'm here? What is my purpose in life? If I want to understand how I can love other people better, that's not a question that science is actually equipped to answer. But it is a question that my faith can inform. And so, in many ways, I see both science and faith as a quest for truth. They're just different kinds of truth. They're complementary kinds of truths. And that for me, there's no dissonance between science and faith. They are both ways that I think God has given us to try to understand our world. And I really like this verse that appears both in the Old and New Testament that talks about how we love God. We love God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our strength, and with all our mind. And it's easy for us to think about what it means to love God with all our heart. But what does it mean to love God with all our mind? This is something that the Christian faith, in the Christian tradition, we believe God calls us to do, is to love him with all our mind. And so that command actually affirms, for Christians, it affirms the use of our minds. God has given us minds to reason, to think, to try to understand the world using our brains. I also like another verse that appears in Scripture. It's Psalm 111 that says, "Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them." And what this verse affirms is the idea that if you look at the creation, if you look at the God's world, so to speak, if you look at the laws of nature, if you look at the laws of mathematics, these are worth studying, and these are worth delighting in. And so here again, you hear in the Christian tradition that it is actually a good thing to study and to try to understand how the world works. So I think about those verses in terms of how it is that there isn't actually a dissonance between using my mind and being a follower of Jesus. The thing I want to focus on today is how is it that my thinking about being a scientist can be consonant with being, how is it that uh, can be, it's not in contradiction with being a person of faith. And the way I want to do this, I want to talk about an idea that sort of runs through many of the ways that I think I'm compelled to faith. Some of them actually involve the ways that I think about the work that I do. And that's the deep idea of transcendence, right? So what does it mean to be transcendent? Well, the word transcendent basically appeals to this idea that there's something deeper going on beyond just what we see, right? So if I say that I had a transcendent experience, it means I had an experience of something that might have appeared to be one thing, but on the surface level, but on a deeper level, something else was going on. And this idea of transcendence shows up in three different ways in my journey, in the ways that I think about things. There's the idea of transcendent truth. There's the idea of transcendent dignity, and there's the idea of transcendent beauty. And the experiences of transcendent truth, dignity, and beauty actually draw me to faith. They compel me to faith, even as a scientist. So I'll start with truth. I'm a mathematician, and so I'm interested in certain kinds of mathematical truths, right? And how do I actually establish a truth? I make some assumptions, then I try to deduce some things from those assumptions, and I prove a result. I prove a theorem, as it's often called. And so this idea that I have, where I prove a theorem, it's kind of amazing, right? Like if someone else actually started with the same assumptions, they could, if they followed a certain line of reasoning that seems self-evident, arrive at the same conclusion, right? And I could be separated from this person by oceans, culture, or time, right? It could be somebody on the other side of the world who has had exactly the same thoughts as me. And so that's kind of a mystery, right? Like it's kind of amazing that I could prove a theorem that somebody else proved having exactly the same thoughts, 300 years ago in another country, right? That's amazing to me. And what it does is it points to a certain transcendent reality that exists outside the material reality, right? So a mathematician might often call this a certain Platonic reality, right? The idea that there are these concepts that exist, these truths that exist outside our physical world, and yet somehow strangely interact with it. The physicist Eugene Wigner often talked about how mathematics is unreasonably effective at explaining the world, right? Math could have just been a figment of my imagination and a figment of someone else's imagination, but the fact that somehow it explains the world is also a great mystery. And so why is it that what is this non-physical reality, this Platonic reality? It points to a certain transcendence of truth that exists outside the material world. It's something that science can't explain or isn't really equipped to explain. It's more maybe in the realm of philosophy if you think about what this reality actually is. But it also affirms the fact that we have the capacity to reason and to know and to access this reality in some strange way. So that's one way in which I think the transcendent truths compels me to be a person of faith. It points to existence beyond just the material existence. The second way in which I experience transcendence is the idea of transcendent dignity. So if you have been following any of the news in the US recently, there's been a lot of conversations about social justice, about treating everybody fairly, regardless of your racial background, about treating everybody with dignity. And underneath this idea of justice is this idea that all of us have a fundamental worth. a fundamental dignity that doesn't come from anything we do. It doesn't depend on the color of our skin. It doesn't depend on how much money we have. And again, if you think about it, this idea that everybody has fundamental dignity is where does that come from, right? If it relied on anything material, then it wouldn't actually be possible for everybody to have the same fundamental dignity and worth, would it? Because, if it relied on how much money you had in your bank account, then people who are richer would be regarded more highly than people who are poor, right? And yet somehow many people have this idea that every human being is worth fighting for their fundamental rights, right? And one of the things that this points to then is this idea of dignity is transcendent. This idea that there's a moral law that says that you shall not kill other people. That's a transcendent reality that exists independent or outside of the physical world. And so it's something that science also can't really access. But my faith actually compels me to have this view, because in the Christian view, all of us, all human beings, are made in what's called the image of God. So that means that we have, in some ways, been endowed, not by virtue of anything that we've done, with the same capacity to reason and to create in the way that God has. God is given us. God has a beautiful mind and has endowed us with minds to reason and to think as well. And so we all have this dignity. The third way that I'm compelled to faith is by experiences of transcendent beauty. So in the meeting of souls, often, if you imagine some of the most intimate moments that you've had with a really good friend, these are moments of transcendence, right? A transcendent certain beauty that you have in that friendship. Or maybe you've stood in front of a beautiful piece of artwork and experience a certain kind of transcendence, or listen to beautiful music. These are experiences that, science in a reductionist way can explain, wavelengths of music, but it can't explain why your soul is moved in some ways, right? In fact, this idea of a soul sort of points to a certain transcendence, right? The fact that we might actually believe that there is more to our life than just what's physical, right? That's also an experience of transcendence, transcendent beauty. The fact that I have a soul, the fact that you can have these deep connections with other people. And science can't actually really address this kind of question in any meaningful way. And so, these experiences, transcendent truth, transcendent dignity, transcendent beauty, are all ways in which I feel compelled to be a person of faith, because I want to experience those things. I want to understand those things. And it's a way of sort of imagining what my life, having a different view of my life than what the world might otherwise tell me. And so, I'll close with this one experience of beauty. That this is part of what drew me to faith in the first place, was this beautiful idea of grace. The fact that I have a certain dignity that has nothing to do with with what I do, or that I don't have to earn this dignity, is the idea that God has endowed us by His grace with dignity, right? And it's a very simple idea, but it's a powerful idea, because it means that I don't have to live in order to just for the accomplishment and performance. I can actually rest in knowing that God loves me, and I don't have to perform in order to earn His love. And it underlies, I think, part of the beauty of the Christian gospel, that regardless of who you are and wherever you've come from, God endowed us with this His grace. And it's by that we respond in our desire and hope to love Him more. All right, so I think I'll end there, and we can have some further time for Q&A later on. But maybe I'll finish with just a question, a few questions to think about as you leave our time. One is I wonder if this idea of mathematical truths existing outside the physical world offers for you any helpful analogy as you consider the possibility of a God, or even maybe a moral law that exists outside ourselves. A second question is to think about, where does our dignity come from? If it doesn't come from an external God, then how is it that we have this fundamental dignity that people feel is worth fighting for? And then the last question is just to think about an experience that you've had of transcendent beauty. Are those experiences just completely within your mind? Or does the universality of those experiences point to a reality beyond ourselves? I look forward to meeting you later. Thank you very much.